I'm back. Mr. Clarke's back. Time to take a look at the Latin American independence movement. Some of the key objectives we'll be looking at today will be the causes of discontent and unhappiness throughout all of Latin America. This included the impact that the Enlightenment had on sparking some of these views. We'll look at the impact of the American and French revolutions, which served as an example for those in Latin America to follow. We'll look at the revolutions in Haiti, Mexico, and throughout Central America. We'll explain how South American nations won independence, including the role of Simon Bolivar in terms of the independence movement. Let's first take a little bit of a look at the map here. When we reference Latin America, it includes Mexico through Central America, the Caribbean, and all of South America. The vast majority of the Latin American countries are Spanish speaking. Many of these countries also are Catholic in terms of their religion. Most of these countries trace their roots back to the period of time when Spain and their colonial empire controlled much of Latin America. Some few exceptions. If you remember the Treaty of Tordesillas, which had split South America up, and it kind of provided the line of longitude, and everything to the east of that line would be Portuguese, and that's where we have Brazil as the large Portuguese-speaking South American country. Okay, now let's take a look at question 1. Describe the members of each social class, the power they had in Latin America. You can see there we have like a visual image there that you can kind of look at too, and I'll stretch it out so it's a little easier to see. Formed kind of a pyramid in size only because the largest group within Latin America was the lowest class, which were Native Americans and slaves. So the Peninsulares, they were members of the highest social class, and of course they formed the smallest group within the social hierarchy or class on the pyramid. They dominated Latin American political and social life. The Creoles, these were Latin Americans of European descent who owned the ranches and mines. They resented their second-class status. Thirdly, of the Mestizos, these are Native American and European descent. So basically, these were Europeans who came over to the New World, and they found somebody that they fell in love with, and they had their own children. And so they were a mix of European and Native American descent. Next were the mulattoes, and they kind of filled in the same general area on the social pyramid. These were Africans and European descent. Both groups here were angry at being denied the wealth, power, and status of whites. So that's the mestizos and mulattoes collectively together have resentment and anger towards the wealthy power of the white upper class. Native Americans, they suffered the most economic misery under the Spanish. They had their land conquered. They were enslaved, many of them. Slave were the masses of enslaved Africans who worked on plantations, who longed for freedom. The lack of equality in the complex and rigid social structure led to discontent and eventually revolutions throughout Latin America. Two, how did the American Revolution and the Enlightenment ideas impact revolutions in Latin America? The success of the American Revolution inspired Creoles to fight for Enlightenment ideals and to throw off foreign rule. Many Creoles had read the Declaration of Independence. The policies implemented by the United States also inspired Latin American revolutionaries to fight for a democratic society. Three, who was Simon Bolivar? How did his travels to Europe impact him? Well, he was a Creole who traveled to Europe and learned about the ideals of the French Revolution. On returning to Venezuela, he advocated liberty, equality, and fraternity, basically the French Revolutionary slogan, and a separation from the Spanish Empire. Often when others visit faraway places, they come back inspired to kind of move forward and lead their own version of a revolution. 4, Haiti's fight for freedom. What led enslaved Haitians to revolt and fight when Toussaint Louverture for independence? Haitians were overworked, underfed, had poor living conditions, and were inspired by the talk of liberty and equality. 5, how might the Haitian Revolution have ended if the French soldiers did not have to battle yellow fever? Napoleon's army might have defeated Toussaint's forces and regained control of Haiti if illness caused by yellow fever hadn't destroyed the French army and led to France's surrender. Okay, next, fill in the details about how these revolutionary leaders helped to free Mexico and Central America from outside control. Of course, we have first Father Miguel Hidalgo. He inspired natives and mestizos to fight for independence and equality and liberty. He called for an end to slavery. Another religious leader, Father Jose Morales. He continued the revolution after Hidalgo's death. He wanted to improve conditions for all Mexicans, including abolishment of slavery and giving the right to vote to all men. Augustin de Iturbide. Just pardon me for a second, Mr. Ketty had come in for a visit here, and he and I had a little moment there. As a conservative, he initially fought rebels. He was backed by the Creoles, the Mestizos, and Native Americans. He overthrew the Spanish viceroy. Mexico gained independence. He tried to add Central American countries to Mexico. 7, how did Iturbide's motive for rebellion differ from the motives of Father Hidalgo and Father Morelos? His motive was to prevent the new Spanish government from imposing liberal reforms in Mexico and Central America. Father Hidalgo and Father Morelos were fighting for independence. They wanted to improve conditions for the majority of Mexicans and to abolish slavery. 8, how did events in Spain impact the fight for Mexican independence? When liberals forced the Spanish king to issue a constitution, Iturbide feared the liberal reforms would be imposed on Mexico. He then decided to fight alongside the rebels to gain independence from Spain. 9, what happened to Spanish-controlled lands in Central America during the 1820s? They had declared their independence from Spanish rule, refused to align themselves with Mexico, and became independent countries. Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Costa Rica all became separate republics. 10, why do you think Mexico's first 2 independence leaders were priests or religious leaders? Mexico is a strongly Roman Catholic nation with deeply religious views and beliefs. They naturally trusted religious leaders, and they felt that they spoke for the good of all people. 11, why did Native Americans first attempt to rebel against Spanish colonial leadership? They first did this in the 1700s with very limited results and success. However, during the 1800s, uprisings became more widespread, frequent, and successful through Latin America. 12, did Simón Bolívar meet with immediate success in his attempt to drive the Spanish out of Venezuela? No, the Civil War raged on for years. The Spanish were very hesitant to give up control. They twice forced Bolívar to flee to Haiti to avoid capture and execution. However, Bolívar never gave up, never, and finally returned with a daring plan. 13, why was Bolívar's plan to march his army across the Andes considered daring? Well, if you're not familiar with the Andes Mountains, well, you should be. Very difficult terrain, rugged, obviously very cold near the elevated areas in the mountains. In the swampy lowlands where the water would run off, it was very difficult to get through there. The snow-capped Andes Mountains could freeze you out in a very quick period of time. So there's many high-risk factors with this plan. 14, what did Bolivar mean when he wrote, "We achieved our independence at the expense of everything else"? Bolivar's goal was to liberate South America and create one single nation, a Gran Colombia. However, rivalries, civil wars between various leaders and groups led Gran Colombia to split into 4 independent countries, which are today Colombia, Panama, Venezuela, and Ecuador. Bolivar had succeeded in liberating South America from the Spanish, but not in creating one unified country. South America's common people had simply exchanged one set of masters for another. 15, identify the areas that are represented by Latin America, South America, and Central America. And we had looked at the map a little bit previously. So Latin America consists of 20 sovereign countries, which cover all stretches of areas from the southern border of the United States to the southern tip of South America, including the Caribbean, and includes almost 13% of the Earth's land surface. South America is a continent, mostly in the southern hemisphere, includes 12 countries. Central America is located south of Mexico and north of the continent of South America, and it consists of 7 countries: Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. And then finally, the lesson reflection: what factors impacted Latin American uprisings? Well, of course, unfair treatment by the Spanish, very similar to what we saw here in our own American Revolution or in the French Revolution, the desire for self-rule, Enlightenment ideals, and stories of other revolutions against colonial powers. Hopefully you enjoyed our discussions here of Latin America and some of the independence movements. And until next time, Mr. Clarke is out.